Hi and welcome to the Cloaked Hedgehog's YouTube channel. Today we'll continue with part 2 of the Four Corners episode. And like I mentioned in the last episode, in the Four Corners area you can encounter both typical dogmen and more skinwalker type ones. This story comes from above.topsecret.com. About 6 months ago, I was out with some friends on the mesa outside of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Half of the group wandered off to go sneak up on a party and scare them, so I was left with my friend's girlfriend. I didn't know her that well at the time, so we were standing around awkwardly, not talking, when we both heard footsteps about 50 feet away. There's no light out there, so I couldn't see what was making the sounds, and she is practically blind. I snuck off and around to try and see what it was. I got close enough, probably 20 feet away, and I saw a coyote walking. I said, "Oh," or something to that effect, quietly, and it looked over at me, which is weird because, as far as I know, coyotes travel in packs, tend to avoid humans, and have huge ears, which wouldn't allow me to sneak up on one. It starts walking off, and this is when the strangest thing happened. It appeared to, very fluidly and naturally, stand up on its hind legs. For a couple of seconds it looked very much like a middle-aged native. It walked behind down into a shallow ravine, and I couldn't see it anymore. I hauled ass back to the cars, told her to get in and lock the door. Then I left to go find my friend. I just told him I saw someone. He looked around and couldn't find any tracks. I was very confused at that point. Later, I started telling one of my close friends about it, and before I could finish, she jumped in and said, "That sounds like a skinwalker." This is from paranormal@about.com. My boyfriend has had more than one account of skinwalkers, but I'll share only one. He said he was leaving his friend's house after band practice from Coyote, Arizona at around 3 a.m. His high beams were on. At the very edge of the light, at about 100 yards away, he saw a tall, thin bipedal being slowly cross the highway. The being's appearance was grayish and had a large head that resembled a canine's, with a snout and pointy ears. It did not appear to have fur, hair, or a tail. The being did not give any indication that it noticed him. It had a slouching walk. He describes its posture as being in the shape of a question mark, and its hands almost reached its knees. Judging by the cedar trees in the area, its estimated height was about 7 feet. My boyfriend was not freaked out since he had previously experienced several such encounters with the unexplained. He picked up his cell phone and phoned his friend and warned him of what the being looked like. It appeared to be headed away from his friend's area of residence, so they were not too concerned. My boyfriend does not know if this being would count as being a skinwalker, since they seem to come in several forms and sizes, being shapeshifters. According to him, skinwalkers are not limited to coyote or wolf form. They could take any form for any reason, to intimidate others, spy, or harm. This story comes from paranormal@about.com. It took place on Highway 191 between the towns of Monticello and Moab, Utah, in late fall of 2010 in the month of November. A couple I know, good friends of mine, were traveling to Salt Lake City one early morning from the small Utah town of Montezuma Creek. Having left the town in the pre-dawn hours, they found themselves passing a small Mormon town called Monticello an hour and a half into their trip in southern Utah's high desert area. About 20 minutes out of that town, they eventually began talking, unfortunately getting into a heated debate rather quickly. This was of no surprise to me since they were always arguing over the most minuscule subjects. This particular argument got a bit more heated than usual, so my friend's wife, who was driving at the time, pulled off to the side of the road to cool off right after passing the Highway 191 and Country Road 46 intersection. It was still a bit dark, but the sky was getting brighter. She stayed in the vehicle while my friend stepped out of the truck to get some fresh air. As he was just about to finish, he took a quick glance at the road behind them and noticed in the distance, a little less than a mile away, a figure on the side of the road, hobbling as it walked towards the truck. This surprised him in that they hadn't seen or passed a person since they left Monticello. As he stood there, he realized it grew in size, meaning that it approached at incredible speed. Backing up, he yelled at his wife, "Get ready to leave fast!" At a dead sprint, he ran to his truck and jumped into the passenger's side, only to find himself screaming at the top of his lungs to his wife, instructing her to go, go, go! Slamming his door, he took one glance back outside his window as the truck peeled off, and saw what he said can only be described as the most mangy-looking human/animal he's ever seen. He couldn't tell if it was in rags or just a heavy-coated black animal, running, hobbling very fast as it quickly caught up to the side of his truck. According to him, the way the eyes looked struck him with terror. They were very large, almost bulging out like a praying mantis's eyeballs, but with pinpoint pupils. Too afraid, he looked away at his wife, who was starting to shake uncontrollably. He took the steering wheel, realizing she had also taken a glance at this thing, her foot still flooring the accelerator. Trying to calm her down, he maintained a firm grip on the steering wheel for a good 2 minutes. Finally, looking over his shoulder outside the truck, he saw nothing. Half an hour later, they were driving into the city limits of Moab, Utah. I'll never forget this story, or that they stayed in Moab all day until family members came down from Salt Lake City to escort them the rest of the way. There's also the story about 4 young people who in 1970 saw a 5'7" tall werewolf running next to their car. 4 Gallup, New Mexico youths allegedly encountered what they called a werewolf along the side of the road near Whitewater one day in January 1970. The being managed to keep pace with the car, which was traveling at 45 miles per hour. One of the witnesses, Clifford Hieronymus, reported that it was about 5'7", and he was surprised that it could go so fast. At first I thought my friends were playing a joke on me, but when I found out they weren't, I was scared. We rolled up the windows real fast and locked the doors on the car. I started driving faster, about 60, but it was hard because that highway has a lot of sharp turns. Someone finally got a gun out and shot it. I know it got hit. It fell down, but there was no blood. It got up again and ran off. It couldn't have been a person, because people cannot move that fast. This story comes from paranormal@about.com, and I also need to ask you to ignore my nose, who will not behave. I think it's grass pollen or something, and even with antihistamines and nose spray and stuff, it misbehaves, so try to ignore it if you can. This story is about a woman called Frances, who was around 20 in 1978 when she and her parents and her younger brother were traveling from Wyoming to Flagstaff, Arizona. She was even warned of traveling through the reservation, especially at night, by a Navajo friend of hers. This is a story. The trip to Wyoming was uneventful. but the trip back to Arizona along the same route more than justified the warning from Frances's friend. It still gives me goosebumps, she says. To this day, I have major anxiety attacks when I have to travel through the North Country at night. I avoid it at all costs. It was a warm summer night, about 10 p.m., when the family's pickup was heading south on 163, about 20 to 30 miles from the town of Coyote. It was a moonless night on this lonely stretch of road, so pitch black that they could only see just a few feet beyond the headlights, so dark that closing their eyes actually brought relief from the fathomless black. They had been driving for hours with Frances's father at the wheel, and the vehicle's passengers had long ago settled into quiet. Frances and her father sandwiched her mother in the truck's cab, while her brother enjoyed the night air in the back of the pickup. Suddenly, Frances' father broke the silence. "We have company," he said. Frances and her mother turned around and looked out the back slider window. Sure enough, a pair of highlights appeared over the crest of a hill, then disappeared as the car went down, then reappeared. Frances commented to her father that it was nice to have company on this stretch of road. If something went wrong, neither vehicle and its passengers would be alone. Thunder began to rumble from the vast, clouded sky. The parents decided that their son should come into the cab before he got soaking wet from any rain that might fall. Frances opened the slider window and her little brother crawled in, squeezing between her and her mother. Frances turned to close the window and again noticed the headlights from the following car. "They're still behind us," her father said. "They must be going to either Flagstaff or Phoenix. We'll probably meet them in Coyote when we stop to fuel up." Frances watched as the car's headlights crested another hill and began its descent until it disappeared. She watched for them to reappear, and watched. They didn't reappear. She told her father that the car should have crested the other hill again, but hadn't. Maybe they slowed down, he suggested, or pulled over. That was possible, but it just didn't make sense to Frances. Why would a driver slow down, or worse yet, stop at the bottom of a hill in the middle of the night, with nothing around for miles and miles? Frances asked her father. "You'd think they want to keep sight of the car in front of them in case anything happened." "People do weird stuff when they're driving," her father replied. So Frances kept watching, turning around every few minutes to check for those headlights, but they never did reappear. When she turned to look one last time, she noticed that the pickup was slowing down. Turning back to look out the windshield, she saw that they were rounding a sharp bend in the road, and her father had slowed the truck to about 55 miles per hour. And from that moment, time itself seemed to slow down for Frances. The atmosphere changed somehow, taking on an otherworldly quality. Frances turned her head to look out the passenger window when her mother screamed and her father cried out, "Jesus Christ! What in the hell is that?" Frances didn't know what was happening, but one hand instinctively reached over and held down the button for the door lock, and the other tightly grabbed the door handle. She braced her back against her small brother and held firmly onto the door, still not knowing quite why. Her brother was now yelling, "What is it? What is it?" Her father immediately flipped on the interior cab light, and Frances could see that he was petrified. "I have never ever seen my father that scared in my whole life," Frances says. "Not when he came home from his tours in Vietnam. Not when he came home from special assignments. Not even when someone tried to firebomb our house." Frances's father was as white as a ghost. She could see the hair on the back of his neck standing straight out like a cat's, and so was the hair on his arms. She could even see the goosebumps on his skin. Panic was filling the small cab. Frances's mother was so frightened that she began shouting in her native Japanese in a high, squeaky voice as she frantically wrung her hands. The little boy just kept saying, "Oh my God." As the pickup sped around the bend in the road, Frances could see that the shoulder dropped off deeply into a ditch. Her father slammed on the brakes to prevent the truck from swerving into this ditch. As the pickup was slowing to a stop, something leapt out of the ditch at the side of the truck. And now Frances could clearly see what had started the panic. It was black and hairy and was eye level with the passengers in the cab. If this was a man, it was like no man Frances had ever seen. Yet despite its monstrous appearance, whatever this thing was, it wore a man's clothes. It had on a white and blue checkered shirt and long pants, I think jeans, Frances testifies. Its arms were raised over its head, almost touching the top of the cab. This creature remained there for a few seconds, looking into the pickup, and then the pickup was past it. Frances could not believe what she had seen. It looked like a hairy man or a hairy animal in man's clothing, she says. But it didn't look like an ape or anything like that. Its eyes were yellow and its mouth was open. Although time seemed frozen and distorted in this moment of fantastic horror, it was all over within a few minutes. The headlights, her little brother coming into the cab, and the thing. By the time the family reached Coyote for gas, they had finally calmed down. Frances and her father climbed out of the pickup and checked the side of the truck to see if the creature had done any damage. They were surprised to see that the dust on the side of the truck was undisturbed, and so was the dust on the hood and roof of the truck. In fact, they found nothing out of the ordinary. No blood, no hair, nothing. The family stretched their legs and rested at Coyote for about 20 minutes. The car that had been following them never did show up. It's as if that car simply vanished. They drove home to Flagstaff with the cab light on and the door securely locked. I wish I could say this was the end of the story, Frances says, but it's not. A few nights later, around 11 p.m., Frances and her brother were awakened by the sounds of drumming. They looked out his bedroom window in the backyard, which was surrounded by a fence. At first they saw nothing but the forest beyond the fence. Then the drumming grew louder, and 3 or 4 men appeared behind the wooden fence. It looked like they were trying to climb the fence, but couldn't quite manage to bring their legs up high enough and swing over, Frances says. Unable to get into the yard, the men began to chant. Frances was so scared she slept with her little brother that night. Sometime later, Frances sought out her Navajo friend, hoping she could offer some explanation for these strange incidents. She told Frances that it was a skinwalker that had tried to attack her family. Skinwalkers are creatures of Navajo legend, witches that can shapeshift into animals. That a skinwalker attacked them was quite unusual, Frances' friend told her, as it had been a long time since she had heard of any activity about skinwalkers, and that they normally don't bother non-natives. Frances took her friend back by the fence where she had seen the strange men trying to climb in. The Navajo woman considered the scene for a moment, then revealed that 3 or 4 skinwalkers had visited the house. She said that they wanted the family but could not gain access because something was protecting them. Frances was astonished. Why, she asked. Why would the skinwalkers want her family? Your family has a lot of power, the Navajo woman said, and they wanted it. Again she said that skinwalkers usually don't bother non-natives, but she believed that they wanted the family enough to expose themselves. Later that day, she blessed the perimeter of the property, the house, the vehicles, and the family. We haven't been bothered by skinwalkers since then, Frances says. Then again, I haven't been back to Coyote. I have gone through other towns on the reservation at night, yes, but I'm not alone. I carry a weapon, and I carry protective amulets. This was all for the Four Corners episodes, but in no way was this all the stories for the Four Corners area. I suggest you check out the other ones. Well, subscribe to my channel if you want to, and like and comment if you want to, and be safe, and I'll see you next time.